Hi, Mark.
Good morning.
Good morning. We want to talk about gamification this morning and how we've applied it and what we've done with it. Before we start, it makes sense to chat about who we are in regards to gaming and gamification, just to give a bit more context as to why we would be relevant to
Okay.
talk about that.
I struggled a little bit in education to be engaged. I remember distinctly a history teacher when I was in secondary school, probably about 13 years old. And he not only introduced a playtime session of Dungeons and Dragons and playing Risk, the board
Oh,
game,
nice.
but he also introduced this interactive game linked with a part of history. And I can't exactly remember what part of history it was now, but I remember him giving people roles. We had a certain number of rounds where we made decisions,
Mhm.
and those decisions had an impact on the character we'd taken up, and we got a score depending on our decisions. That stuck in my mind. That kind of helped propel me into playing tabletop roleplay and board games with a group of friends, and then going into live roleplay, which is more of a outdoor interactive kind of acting and playing of certain characters to try and achieve certain goals.
Yeah. I went through a slightly different start. So with me, it was more at home. My father is an avid board gamer and role player, and he introduced it to me quite early on. I would listen in and watch my father play with his friends when I was a small kid. And so I've played board games for the better part of my life, probably since I can move them around on a board. And I've been doing role playing for over 20 years. I have spent a significant amount of time analyzing what transposable skills I have learned while playing those games and what I have learned about myself. I would say in the last 10 years or so, I've taken a more active approach to using the things that have worked for me, apply them to other people or other contexts, and experiment with that. And I've been applying that in business for the last 5, 6 years. I'm starting to have evidence that this approach works pretty much anywhere with pretty much anyone. Maybe it makes sense to define first what we think gamification is and what the world sees it as at the moment, just before we go into some examples to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Have you got a
Well, I
something
think,
to start us off?
yeah, so linked with what you're talking about, I started to talk about education, didn't I, in my experience earlier on,
Yes.
where someone was dramatically changing the way they were transferring education to me. My experience of the UK education system, moving into university and from further education as well, tends to be this chalk and talk type transfer of information where a specialist stands up in front of everybody and shows a bland looking PowerPoint presentation and just
Yep.
speaks to everybody while they listen for 45 minutes or
Yes.
an hour, while they make notes.
Yep.
And that's, I think there are changes happening, but that still seems to be the standard type approach of someone transferring information to somebody else.
Yes.
And I think from being on a number of training courses through my career, yes, I'm reasonably fresh in the morning if I'm doing a day's training course. And there's some new people, and I have a bit of chat to those people. So I've got a certain amount of energy, and it's a new
Mm.
topic, and someone's introducing it, fine. And they might have a really open personality and be really friendly, and you'll be thinking, oh, cool. But just after lunchtime, when you've had something to eat, naturally people's energy levels have dropped a little bit. It can, for probably quite a lot of these training sessions, be a real struggle for me to maintain my focus
Aren't for
and
everyone.
take in this information. So yeah, I think that's still the norm, if you like, that people go to when they think,
Mm.
I'll transfer some information to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think the trend we're seeing, so people are much more open-minded to what they call gamification, but the general trend that I see is adding an icebreaker
Yeah.
or a fun little exercise, which most of the times looks fun. It sounds fun to do, but it's very poorly designed in general, and is also generally not adapted either to the topic that's being discussed or the people that are attending. So what we have now, I think, is still the Excel or text-loaded PowerPoint presentation way of transferring information, which is broken up by small little exercises
Yeah.
that supposedly are fun, but are generally not coherent and often poorly designed. For me, what gamification really is, or at least the way that I use the term now, it might not be the right term, but it's to look at what I'm trying to achieve and look at what is, from my knowledge and experience about learning, about knowledge transfer, about change management, what is going to be the most effective way to anchor that piece of information, that practice, that process into my audience's mind, using as many emotional and sensorial triggers as I
Yeah.
can to make it stay and grip. I'm going to design something based on my knowledge of teaching, my knowledge of game design, but also my knowledge as a learner and gamer. So on the receiving end, to come up with something that will work well. Now, that might sometimes be something that looks very much like a standard PowerPoint, but
Yeah.
actually has some mechanisms built in which create some competition, some tension, some time pressure, whatever, which makes it much more fun than if I was to do an icebreaker that's poorly executed, but which looks potentially more like a game. So for me, it's really about what are the most effective tools to achieve my objective, fully accepting how a human works and not what is socially acceptable or what is industry standard practice. So that's maybe my
Yeah.
pitch.
I've got an example of where I, at least in part, while I was attempting to do this, when
Yeah.
I delivered a 2-day training course
Yeah.
to about 8 to 12 people in a classroom setting. When I designed it, I did have a lot of PowerPoint slides. However, one of those slides would be a change in the activity. I had a mix of me talking,
Yeah.
giving some introduction to something. Then I had this kind of interactive, facilitated element where I was trying to draw ideas and some interaction with my audience. I had a visual element where they watched short snippet videos, about
Hmm.
5 minutes or so, and they might reflect on that video. I had a role play element where some people were playing a certain role. So this was involved in people trying to get a job or trying to get someone else a job. One people were playing the people on the end of the line who were trying to be a bit awkward and say, oh, well, we don't really need that person here. And the other team were trying to give all these positive reasons why they might like to try this person who has these
Yeah.
particular skills. And then I had what was more of a game element, but was linked to some of the skills I thought people would need in the context of the training, which is where I had these big Lego blocks and people had photos and they were viewing them from different perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
And you had a worker who was the only person who was able to
Who could
move the
touch them.
blocks,
Yeah.
and someone who was the controller who was able to, who was the person giving the instructions to that person. So I really tried to have a whole range of elements, and I tried to make sure that those segments of training were probably no more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes at most, because people normally can't give their full attention to anything going past kind of 30, 40 minutes. And I gave little breaks as well, where they could decompress a bit and then come back fresh. So that was my attempt, if you like, to create a more interesting and engaging workshop
That's it.
experience.
Yeah, so that's my experience, is that in general, if people are actively engaged in something rather than passively listening back, and they are having fun, experiencing some kind of positive emotion during the process, they are more likely to adopt, accept, absorb any of the information or things that you're trying to convey to them. My approach for workshops is similar. The benchmark that I go off is more an hour and a half, which is what's scientifically proven to be the maximum attention span of a human. But in principle, it's the same. And I also go off of some stuff that comes from storytelling and the cinema industry, which is attention arc, right? You don't want to keep people all the time on the edge of their seat because it doesn't work. It's exhausting. And you don't want people to be sitting back and looking at spreadsheets all the time because it's boring. You want to alternate both. And so it's a combination of those different levels and intensity of engagement that go throughout. But maybe we want to give a few real life examples of what we would consider gamification, just to illustrate it a bit, and then we can go a little bit more into the businessy side, the change management side of things.
Yeah. So I've heard of a number of examples of gamification. I can't remember the specifics, but I know that a city council was trying to increase the levels of exercise in its population because they'd identified the health benefits of that, and within a what they're called, the underground. It was it was in part of the transport system where you had an escalator and you had stairs, and the majority of people are using the escalator.
Yeah.
So they constructed a step piano on these steps going up. It had mapped out a piano, which if you stepped on those steps, it made the notes of those pianos. And guess what? That made people smile and increased the footfall on the steps in contrast to the escalator, which I thought was a really neat and fun way of encouraging people, of modifying their behavior by rewarding them with stepping on a huge piano.
Yeah.
More of a novel thing to do.
Yeah. Generally having some kind of audio visual funny feedback gets people to do stuff. And then you have the sort of competitive element. You were mentioning that in a certain neighborhood where people tended to speed driving their car.
Yeah.
They set up a system to enter the people that were below the speed limit in a random lottery, and then someone would win a certain amount of money. You could only enter if you were driving below the speed limit because people want to win this thing, whatever it is. People are generally interested in those kind of games of chance. You'll get much more people driving below the speed limit. These are both simple examples of how to get people to change their behavior by tapping into that fun or game side of their brain, because walking on a stair that makes sound has no further benefit to you than entertainment. You're not doing it for anything else than entertainment value. And of course, there's the added benefit of it's exercise. But why does your brain choose to walk the stairs instead of going up the escalator? It's because it's fun, engaging, it's intriguing.
And I think in terms of the speeding one that you've just mentioned, I think that's really interesting. There's a cost to that council of people's speeding and the accidents and the clogging up of the roads due to accidents, which can cause massive amounts of loss in time and people not getting to work and therefore loss in revenue in that council, etc. And a lottery is an even cleverer way of doing it because you're shelling out probably a relatively small amount of money to have a large impact on a group of people's behavior to slow them down and make things safer. So I think it's really interesting, and it illustrates how important it is in terms of the design of that gamification. You mentioned that people use these little icebreakers that don't seem to be linked to what you're doing. Having a good think about what the purpose of the gamification is, because gamification for gamification's sake maybe might make it a little bit better, but you want to design it for a purpose.
Well, the interesting thing is that gamification for gamification's sake isn't gamification, it's just a game. But if you look at what we do at IQM, when we play a game, we're not playing a game just to play a game. It's because our brain is super full and we need a reset because we're feeling a little bit down and we need a pick-me-up, or because we want to improve collaboration and coherence in the team. none of the gaming we do is random. There's always a thought behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the nice ideas, is to say that we're serious about gaming. We see it as a tool. Yes, we enjoy it. Of course we do. And that's why we do it. But we've appreciated to its full potential and we use it, maybe not to its full potential, but we are trying to use it in an effective way. And so to maybe start looking at some of the business applications a little bit more, for me, one of the hardest things and one of the reasons why I have a job is because people are reluctant to change. Even the most open-minded people and the most flexible people, it costs energy to change. It always does. And you have people who are very reluctant to change and for whom it will take a lot of energy, and you have people for whom it will take a small amount of energy. But when people's energy levels are low, which they generally are when they're working because they're spending their energy on their job or other stuff in their life, you need to make the barrier to entry as low as possible for them to make that change if you want them to change something, whether healthy habits, implementing a new piece of software, a new process, or a new policy. It always comes back for me to the, and now I don't remember who came up with this analogy, but the elephant and the rider, where in your brain you have an elephant, which is your emotional, impulsive part of your brain. And then you have the rider, who's the small, rational part of the brain that's sitting on top of that elephant. And when you can do something because of a rational reason, the rider is steering the elephant into a certain direction. Now, the elephant is a very impulsive, but has a lot of energy and a lot of power. And the rider is very rational, calculating, etc., but doesn't have that much strength to steer the elephant in any direction. And so the more your rider needs to work against the elephant to go in a certain direction, the more energy it's going to cost you and the less likely you are to succeed. Any lasting change that you want to make, you need to get the elephant on board.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're always going to have to fight to do a thing. And then when you're on low energy or when you're unmotivated or frustrated, your rider's not going to have the energy and the elephant's going to take back over.
And
you're going to take the
and you get
escalator.
elephant on board by tapping into someone's emotions.
Exactly. Because the elephant wants to see what kind of sound the steps make, or the elephant wants to win the lottery, because those are primal emotional things. You generally talk about the monkey brain. It's the monkey that takes over. It's playing silly buggers like we were talking about yesterday. That's always appealing, or at least to a certain extent, and it's definitely more appealing than something that's purely factual and rational. What we've done within IQM, but also in other businesses that we've engaged with, is we've tried to use this gamification in order to convince the elephant to change its behavior.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk about some of the stuff we've done internally within IQM. I just realized that actually Woohoo is a prime example of this as well.
It is the prime example.
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about Woohoo briefly, because it's not part of IQM, although IQM is kind of working with Woohoo. A number of the key people in each company are the same. It is a joint interest. We are attempting to make a part of education more engaging. And we are creating an app that helps young children between the ages of 4 and 6 learn their phonics. We're linking that with the UK educational system. What we're doing is making the game multiplayer so that you are interacting and having fun with others as a team and working towards a team goal, which I think is an important element. We're linking it in with fairy tales. The children are reading already in books and they have a link with, so we're helping to give them some initial context with the game. Kind of creatures are coming onto the screen and they're having to press certain letters at the right times to then defeat that creature so they can move on to the next location or level. We've done some testing in schools and a large proportion of the children seemed excited by it, making kind of noises of excitement, and they want to continue playing it.
Yep.
And those children generally have a short attention span,
Yep.
which increases as they get older, and they seem to want to be playing on this game for longer than their normal average attention span, which is really good evidence for us that it is engaging. So I think that's an example of where we are creating a product as a business that we want to increase the motivation of those children to engage in an educational activity that will have an educational benefit to them.
Yeah, and it's, if we looked at the problem now, obviously we're rolling it out in the UK, but initially it was designed, and it still is, to help kids who have less access to education. We want those kids to keep coming back, to want to practice more and learn more. And that's why we made it a game, because we want to overcome that hurdle of education is boring, I don't want to engage with it, because literacy is something that's so important, and it gives you access to every knowledge pretty much that you would like to access out there. So that drives the motivation aspect. Now, something else that we've done within IQM itself is when we joined the business almost 3 years ago, or more than 3 years ago.
2.5, yeah, 2 3/4.
Yeah. We changed a lot of things. We set in motion a lot of change processes. We put in place a governance system, which wasn't existing before. We put in place a strategy, which wasn't there before. In a traditional business, you would have, if you're lucky, had a strategy presentation once a year, which are probably those PowerPoints full of text and presented in a more or less engaging way. But people don't really engage with it, don't really retain the information. And there are very few org charts that people go back to and enjoy looking at. And so we set out to change that. And we said, okay, how can we, because we need people to retain this information. We need people to want to engage with it and understand what we're trying to tell them. So I thought, what if I make it visually entertaining so that people want to have a look at it while they're looking at the object? They will get exposed to that information we want to give to them, which is when I did those strategic steampunk scribbles. We had a big steampunk machine, which was depicting IQM, which was evolving over time, and had a change log underneath where we explained why we were changing certain parts of the business and what we were trying to achieve. And likewise, in that org chart, because it was a visual org chart, we had the description of the different roles that people had and who they were associated to. And so that was an attempt at getting people more engaged with some of those frameworks we were putting in place, which I think at the time were reasonably successful. Then we moved out of the office and those posters weren't visible all the time. So that obviously decreased their effect, but they have been effective to a certain extent. That's another example in terms of having people engage with information that might otherwise be less fun or less attractive just by themselves.
I think another one that we did, which I thought was really quite memorable, was the financial goal auction, where we wanted to assign, if you like, when we had some profits that we were able to assign,
Yep.
we wanted to improve IQM's working environment in a certain way. And we didn't want to just decide what was best for everybody. So probably traditionally, if you had that approach that you wanted everybody to have an input, you would say, oh, could you come up with some ideas of what you think we should change in IQM, and then decide what then to buy and put in place. We added in some other steps there.
Yep.
We did ask people what they thought they wanted to add to the business, but then created an interactive workshop. We used a program called Tabletop Simulator, which is normally used for people to play board games remotely.
Yep.
But it gives you a three-dimensional environment where you can move things around. I created these pictures of the items. So they then become
Hmm.
these physical cards that can be moved around. For example, we had a water cooler, we had chairs, we had holidays, we had upgrade in software, we had upgrade in computers, and all of these things
Mm.
that people had fed into that process. Everybody had a certain amount of chips to bid on these items. We had a number of rounds of bidding, which actually you were controlling this chart which showed the
Yep.
levels of bids in those items. And then after each round, it would also allow us to have a bit of a discussion, and you could get people to change their minds on where they put things or influence them for bidding in the next round. It made it this more experiential kind of process where you had visuals, you had discussion, you heard the reasons of people
Yep.
why it was important. That feeds into some emotion for some people of why
Mm.
they felt something was important to them, and that would sway other people to understanding those people's perspective more as well. So I thought it had a number of really positive effects.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the more successful workshops that we did in that sense. I think that leads me to some things we did with
Yep.
external businesses. So here we're talking about designing a game to capture people's feedback and have them vote and come to a consensus in a structured way, which I might bring up again with another customer I'm talking to at the moment who's trying to figure out how to manage a backlog with multiple stakeholders. That sort of voting and auction system might be something that they might want to look at. But the other similar thing that this makes me think of is the escape room. I called it a digital escape room, but it's kind of a treasure hunt. It's kind of the same, where I've now done it with two customers. Where you want a certain group of people to learn how to properly use a new tool.
Yep.
Now, you could give them a tutorial, you could give them a demo, you could give them a user manual, which will give them all the information they need. They will have to go through it themselves, and it's less likely to be retained. You could give them a number of exercises to do, supervised or unsupervised, more likely to be retained, not super engaging. Or you can set them a number of tasks to do with the tool that lead to an objective, set them up in teams, and make it a competition. And now everybody loves it. I did this for a data reporting tool where the users were meant to input data. There was operational data that was useful for the users themselves, and they weren't using, they weren't fully utilizing. And so we wanted them to build the correct habits in terms of entering the data correctly, but also discovering the potential of analyzing the data that they had input. And so what we did is I set up this series of tasks that they had to do to create data, which if they did correctly, changed some of the parameters in the system, then they had to go into the reporting area of the tool, the dashboard, the analysis area of the tool, where they had to tweak some parameters and create some new charts, which made them familiar with how to use the analysis tool. And if they did that correctly, a secret message would appear. And so the team that gave me this secret passphrase first would win the race. So if you as a team distribute the tasks correctly of creating
So
this data.
you're getting them to think about how they effectively do a task as well.
Exactly. And you're getting them to exchange best practices. So I made sure to put people who were using the system quite well already among the users spread out across the teams so that they could help and coach other people. You put them under time pressure and give them a competitive side and a collaborative side. And all of a sudden, that same tutorial was condensed down to an hour and is memorable because people are now engaged with their team and beating other people. They kind of forget about the fact that they're training on this new tool, which was really successful. And we had a lot of positive feedback from that. I've actually done a similar thing pushed to an extreme where we had a 5-minute slot in a 1 hour meeting. We did a tiny treasure hunt in like 3 minutes. and they had 30 seconds for each component because we wanted them to come up with a plan. They were stakeholders who were always late and bad at giving us their planning. They had to report their planning to us in a strategy team, and we always had to chase them. And so we got 5 minutes in one of their meetings and had them make their planning in 3 minutes. Basically, a collaboration with a counterpart from another region and do collaborative planning in 3 minutes. We tricked them into it. We said, just work with us. Oh, you've got 30 seconds to answer this question. You've got 30 seconds to answer this question. And then by the end, we said, oh, you've actually done your planning now. Obviously not in detail, but we tricked them into this fun thing. So I've done this with small groups, big groups, people who are gamers and people who aren't gamers at all. Everybody engages with this. And, young, old, it doesn't matter. It just works in my experience.
Very interesting examples, and it shows how I know you did some significant preparation for those because you want to pitch it at the right kind of technical level. You want to make sure that people are engaged. You need to be good at facilitating that. There's a range of skills you need to set that up to work. But once you have those skills and design something for somebody's requirements, you can really engage those people. I've been to a number of training sessions in the past, and the majority of them were relatively boring, and I forgot 90% of the information.
Yeah.
And that's not effective. That's not effective training. And there are other ways of doing that. And again, like you said, if you can engage someone with a number of the elements that you're talking about, the competition, them actually physically doing something, the retention, and therefore the value for money for the training. You're investing a certain amount of time and effort, and what actually within a business is money. You have a goal of transferring some sort of information from one person to another. If you can do that really, really effectively, and they have a much higher retention of that information, that's going to be much more effective towards your goals.
Absolutely.
You get me excited about gamification, Thibaut.
There we go. Excellent. I think I've got a couple more examples that maybe we can quickly go through before wrapping up. One of the things I always do when I give a workshop is I've got a really simplified case study about a caveman. A lot of people know my Bob the Caveman. This is gamification at its simplest, basically just storytelling using an analogy or an allegory. Because it's it pulls people out of the context of their work and they're much more open to receiving the information. People remember my workshop because of Bob. They remember, oh, Thibaut, that's the guy with the caveman, right? And that's a thread in their brain that they can pull on and find out what's attached to Bob. It leads them back to the stuff that I actually wanted to teach them in that workshop. I would say the simplest form of gamification is make it a fun story, give it a fun jacket, which is the opposite of what I just spoke about before, where the appearance is just a tool that you're using in your work every day, but how you use it is fun. So it's sort of the opposite, but again, I choose which kind of gamification I use depending on what I'm trying to achieve and how intensely I need to design a game in order to achieve what I want. Which maybe brings me to the last example I've got for now, which is how we designed a website, a landing page for the design team, the UX UI team within a large organization that's one of our customers. We're now using that approach to design our own website. We want people that come to this website to learn a bit more about how we work before they reach out to us to get help, because we don't want people to reach out just because of buzzwords. We want people to reach out because they understand and believe in the methodology. In the case of that center, it was human-centric design or design thinking. And so what we said is we're going to purposely frustrate the people that come to the website. We're going to tell them the information you want is here, but we're not going to give it to you yet. You have to work for it a bit. And so they had this book where you have to go to a certain page based on the choice you make.
Create your own adventure.
That one. So we had a create your own adventure type approach where we said, okay, you need to help our little alien friend. And what should he do next? Based on what he did next, the page would change, you would get more choices. And after a few choices, you would either fail or be far along enough to get access to those other pages that you initially wanted to go to. And if that's enough for you, then you go to those information pages or that registration page. But if you want to keep playing and keep learning more about that methodology, and that's sort of what we want to make the teaching of that methodology scalable and that people can do it in their own time at their own pace.
There's an element of differentiation there as well, isn't there?
Exactly.
For the way in which different people want to access information.
Exactly. We designed and tested this game, which was a simulation of a human-centric approach to project management, where you were sometimes kind of tricked into making the wrong decision because we wanted people to experience that failure. That's when we knew from doing it in person that the aha moment came from, that people were like, now I get it. And we wanted to trigger that moment in the game. So we had a discussion about what triggered that moment and how we can recreate it in a digital way. And we were quite successful in testing with that and getting positive feedback. And like I said, now we're taking that approach to redesign the IQM website. I would say stay tuned to see when we put it out and see what we mean in a public environment. So yeah, I think those are a lot of different flavors of gamification. And we haven't even touched on the sort of habit platforms that we've also talked about. So I don't know if you've got any closing thoughts, Mark, any conclusions.
One of the things that popped into my mind was this kind of going full circle. I started to talk about my education. Overall, it wasn't super engaging for me. And I found this teacher doing something differently, which I really engaged in. Ironically, that teacher stayed for a year or two, then was offered more money in industry and left the school. At the moment, I am creating an approach through mechanisms called EduLARP, where we're using live role play and board games to try and make education more engaging. And I've had some meetings with a executive head who's in charge of 4 primary schools. He's excited and wants me to run a pilot project to deliver part of their curriculum in a much more gamified and interesting way. That original history teacher sparked something in me which I've maintained an interest in through my life. Now I'm thinking I would like to have an influence on the way children are educated. And as we've already said, we're doing that in Woohoo, and we're doing that within IQM in a business sense as well. We've got certain skills and experience where we're creating these tools to solve problems for people in education and for people in other businesses.
Yeah.
That's what, and we're really enjoying doing, really engaged if we get the opportunity to have that positive impact on another business.
Yeah, because that would be my main closing thought. It requires a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve. That's business analysts' skills and a good to very good capacity of designing games for different audiences.
Yeah.
And understanding what tools will work to achieve that objective. You can break that up into multiple people if you want. So someone who understands the requirements, someone who's good at game design, etc. And you can make that into a team. What's the word I'm looking for here? Easy is not quite what I'm going for, but we'll go with that for now. You shouldn't expect that this is something that is easy to do and is easy to do successfully. Probably everyone listening to this has witnessed bad examples of this, and probably more bad examples than good examples. Obviously, like Mark said, we're quite passionate about this stuff. And from what I've seen and from what I'm seeing with you as well, we're quite good at this as well. So I would say you can do something like this with us or with another party that's competent enough, but don't give up on making certain stuff fun just because it hasn't worked once or twice. You need to learn and iterate. The whole agile and iterative approach. A lot of the stuff that I hear is this reluctance to try some of these things. It does take a bit of convincing and confidence to get customers to agree to trying some of these approaches. So if you're,
Games in the workplace,
yeah,
aren't we working? Isn't that? Yeah.
it's supposed to
No,
be serious. Well,
exactly.
it's not incompatible.
No.
It's not incompatible at all. So yeah, give it a try, and if you want to bounce some ideas, always available, I'd say.
Yep. Great.
Sweet. Thank you, Mark.